I'm going to start by introducing myself. My name is Lois Lunawitz. I am the coordinator of the Worcester Regional Medical Reserve Corps. We cover 38 communities in central Massachusetts, and my territory runs all the way from Dunstable and Pepperell up in the north east corner, all the way down to Hull and Brimfield and Wales, down in the southwest corner of the state. And after the presentation, if you go over to the table, you'll see some information on the Medical Reserve Corps. And the gray brochure has a map inside that shows the territory that I cover, as well as the two territories, thank you so much, as well as the two territories covered by the other two Medical Reserve Corps in Central Mass. A little bit about the Medical Reserve Corps. We came into being following 9/11. We're a federally recognized volunteer organization made up of both medical and non-medical volunteers. The 3 Central Mass units came into being in 2006. That's when we were federally recognized. So we've all kind of been working around the same length of time. And I was one of the original founders of what's now the Greater Grafton Medical Reserve Corps. So the reason that I'm here today is to talk about preparedness. And the reason that I'm here to talk about preparedness is that in an emergency, whether it's a natural disaster, such as hurricanes, which we're now into hurricane season, or if it's a man-made disaster like the gas explosions that happened in Lawrence, Andover, and North Andover about 3 years ago, we need to understand that things can happen unexpectedly, and we need to be prepared for them. In the case of hurricanes, for example, or winter storms, we usually get a fair amount of notice that those are coming. But as we witnessed, if you've been watching the news and you saw that Yellowstone National Park had an unexpected flooding event, which was pretty significant, we don't always know. And things can change. And with the climate changing, we know that places that might normally be safe may not be going further. So what I'm going to do now is have a seat, and we're going to go through the workbook that I gave you, page by page, and I'm going to talk with you about how to complete this. You're going to take them home with you when you're done. I recommend that you put them on your refrigerator. They will be a work in progress. And also, when you go over to the table, you'll notice there are some very large star-shaped magnets. That's so you can clip it to your refrigerator. Put it in a place where you'll think to look at it, so that as I go through this, you'll see that there may be things within this document that are subject to change. And when you see it, you'll go ahead and change it. So, if you can put your name on the front if you want to. If you don't have other people in your household, you probably don't need to do it. The second page of the document says, in an emergency, people help each other. And it asks you to list some ways that you might be able to help others and some ways that you might need help. So I'm going to start with the you may need help part first. If you were in your apartment alone, would you have access issues? In other words, would you need help to get out of your apartment? Would you need help to get out of your building? If you're not leaving your apartment, which we call sheltering in place, are you in a situation where you might be running out of a medication and you might need to have someone pick up a medication for you? In terms of what you can offer, this has a lot to do with where you live and who is around you. Maybe you have a neighbor who you want to check in on. Maybe you've got family members that you understand their circumstances better than others, so you would know what assistance they need. These are just good to jot down so that you have that information. Because I'm going to tell you right now, in an emergency, people do not think clearly. You always think, oh, I've got it under control, I'll be able to handle this. But suddenly when you're faced with an unexpected situation, your mind is going to race and you may not remember all those little things that you were certain that you were going to remember. Page 3 is a checklist of emergency supplies. And some of these are geared towards staying at home, like non-perishable food with manual can opener, water, and they recommend 1 gallon of water per person per day. Plus, we always want to make sure that we're taking care of our animals as well. First aid kit, local maps, flashlights with radios, and things like that. The other thing that is on this list, and I do have separate checklists over on the table that you're welcome to take. There may be things that if you're leaving your house, and you may need to leave your house. So things like a copy of your preparedness plan with your phone numbers, cash or checks, changes of clothing, depending on how long you think you might be gone, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute. Sunscreen, prescriptions, extra eyeglasses. So it's really, you have to kind of think about what am I going to need if I need to stay home, and what am I going to need if I need to leave. And the best example I can give about the staying home part is think about what happened that day in March in 2020 when the state of Massachusetts was closed for COVID. I know a lot of people were not prepared for that. And so that's a really good example of why you need to plan ahead. On page 4, ideas for owners of pets and service animals. Show of hands, how many of you have a pet at home? Not a lot of you, but a few of you. And I'm going to ask Ed to step in and talk about this. Ed has some information that might be helpful to you pet owners, also at the table. And Ed, would you like to say a few words about pets?
Sure. I have checklists for preparedness for your pet. 2 types. You also want to remember your pet's medication. Make sure you have enough food to last for a few days. A crate or a carrier for your pet in case you have to leave. They're important. It's hard to handle an animal like a cat. You can always put your cat in a pillowcase. Carry him out that way if you have to. And I have checklists for everybody. I also have a pet passport I'll give to the people who have pets. You fill out the information, you put a picture of your pet on it. You either keep it on your refrigerator or you can keep it in your car. That way if you have an issue, somebody can find it, you know you have the pet, contact your relatives or animal control to take care of your pet while you're in a hospital or something else. All right?
I'm sorry, go ahead. I see a hand.
I just have a question.
Sure.
Are you referring to only dog and cat pets? I mean, what if you have reptiles?
All pets.
Okay.
Okay. So you would want a picture of each pet?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
And I don't know, what I've learned is that they recommend that you be in the photo with your pet. So that if you're separated, you can prove that that's your pet. The other thing, and I can talk about this from personal experience, I live about 20 minutes from New Hampshire, and we were caught in the ice storm of 2008. I had 2 cats. I lost my power for a week. By the 3rd day, it didn't matter how many layers of clothes or how many blankets I had on the bed. I could not stay in the house any longer. However, I still had to report to work, which was in Grafton. So I had to make other accommodations. I wasn't prepared. I should have been, but I had to run around and try to gather up cat food and a litter box and cat litter And like Ed mentioned, the way to, get my cats into the car and out of the car, because obviously they were going to be with me. And I had one person say to me, but they've got fur coats, and you can just leave dry food on the floor. And I said, I'm not leaving my babies behind. I'm not going to do it. So we never know when we're going to be caught. So it's important to plan for you and your cat. On page 5 of the plan, this talks about having valuable information such as insurance policies, either for your home or the contents of your apartment. If you've got insurance, dental insurance, pet insurance, car insurance, medical, vision. So there's a couple of different ways to go about this. One way would be to just make physical copies of your policies. Your home policy is probably one of the most important in your car. Another way to do it, if you're tech savvy, I've had people tell me that what they did was they put all the information on a flash drive. And to take it one step further, one person told me that they made 3 copies. And they kept one, and they gave one to a neighbor, and they gave one to their children. So that no matter who was affected, somebody had that information available for them. Another thing on page 5 is your medications. In most cases, but not all, you should be able to have all your medications in one spot, and as you're running out the door, you're gonna sweep them into either your go bag, which we'll talk about, or a plastic grocery bag or something, because as we all know, a lot of our plans don't allow us to get extra medication to have on hand. We can only refill it when the 30 days are up. But what if something happens and you can't do it? What if you're not home? How many people heard on the news that when the gas explosions happened, people were at work and then they found out they couldn't get into their houses? And that happened for several days. But if you have a list of medications, then your pharmacy can refill them for you. Or if you end up in a shelter, there's usually a provision within the shelter plan that someone who's working at the shelter is going to have a way to contact a local pharmacy or a pharmacy that is available to get prescriptions for you. But it's good to have them written down someplace. How many of you have smartphones that you use? Not many. So I'm one of those people that has everything. My entire life is in my smartphone, which usually is with me, but we all know things happen. I will tell you, in the first few days of the ice storm, cell service was not available because I didn't have a smartphone in 2008 either, because they didn't exist. But it's important, even if you've got them in your phone, in case you can't get into your phone for some reason, have them written down. There's also a line that says, I am allergic to. This could be a drug, it could be a food, it could be grass pollen, whatever allergies you might happen to have, because we don't know if these emergencies are going to happen in the summertime or the wintertime. So if you've got allergies, write them down. And then the last thing on page 5 talks about assistive devices.
Page 6 and out.
Oh, all right. I don't know why mine says 5, but assistive devices are things like wheelchairs, Inogen oxygen pumps. There could be other types of things too. Make sure that you know what the name of your device is, the serial number. I don't know how many of you have ever had to call your local provider for cable television or your telephone service. How many of you have access to printers? The first thing they ask you is, what's the serial number on the bottom of the box? So, and I know for myself, a lot of times it's like, oh my God, I can't even reach it. So you want to write down the serial number, the size and weight of the device, the doctor who prescribed the device. Because if something happens to your assistive device, again, you're going to need to have someone help you get in touch with the manufacturer to find out how to repair it. My next page, and I won't give you page numbers anymore because apparently they don't match, is important papers. This is medical records, advanced directives. How many know what an advanced directive is?
What was?
An advanced directive.
Oh, yeah.
Anyone not know what an advanced directive is?
No.
All right, so an advanced directive is basically your final wishes.
Oh, okay.
Whether or not you want to be put on a feeding tube, whether or not you want to be resuscitated if you stop breathing, whether or not you want to, be given liquids to keep you going. So, but it's gone way beyond the yes, I want CPR or no, I don't. There's a lot more to it. You can usually get these from your doctor. There's actually a Massachusetts Department of Public Health approved form that you should complete, and I strongly recommend that you make sure that your family members, the ones who are potentially going to be responsible for what happens to you, that they know what your advanced directive says before the time comes. Passport and driver's license, most people carry their driver's licenses with them. Not everybody does. Some people don't have driver's licenses. They have official ID cards because they don't drive. You might need your birth certificate, your social security card, if you've got a will. I know this all sounds overwhelming, but the one thing that I want to just caution you is that I'm going over all of this with you today. You don't need to leave here and go home and fill out all of these pages today. What I recommend is that you kind of plan a schedule and try to do 1 and 2 pages, 3 pages a week until you get it completed. Don't let it become an overwhelming task in your head, because if you do, you'll never fill it out. And this is actually an abbreviated form, so we want you to think about this as a way of planning your future, and don't let it overwhelm you. And oh, by the way, if you've got family members or close friends, they can help you with this. You're not alone. And I'm willing to say, Cindy, are you still here?
Yeah.
If they wanted to come and bring it to the senior center at some point and get assistance, I'm sure they could do that too.
Absolutely.
So don't be overwhelmed by this. For pet owners, make sure that you have your veterinarian's name and phone number. And if you haven't already written down your pet meds, make sure you do. For years and years, I have to say, I just lost both of my 2 kitties in April. They were 17 and a half. They were brother and sister. And I can't go any further or I'll cry. But one of my kitties was on insulin for years. It was one medication. It was not a big deal. But I had to make sure you write the prescription number down and where you get it. This is a tough one, this next one. I can find and shut off my utility valves. And they talk about water, gas, propane, and electricity. Now, depending on where you live, you may have natural gas that's in the street. You may have a large propane tank in the back of your yard. Or you're just going to have electricity and water. Or you may have a well, in which case you're going to have a water pump in your basement somewhere. I can honestly tell you that this is tricky, because not only do you need to know where your shutoffs are, you need to know how to shut them off. And I'll tell you an interesting story. During the ice storm, I didn't know whether to shut my furnace off or not. I was afraid that if I shut it off and then the power came back on and I couldn't get there soon enough, I wouldn't have enough heat and the pipes would freeze. But I was also afraid that if I didn't shut it off and there was a surge, that I might damage the furnace. So I called my furnace repair company and I said, what should I do? And you know what their answer was? We're not really sure what to tell you. So I decided to follow my instincts and I left the furnace on and everything was okay because I actually didn't get home until about a day or so after the electricity came back on. So they recommend this, but it's a tricky situation. The next page talks about my personal network. And your personal network is basically who are you going to call in an emergency? Do you have a relative that you're going to call? Do you have a friend? Do you have a neighbor? Your neighbor may be in the same situation as you are, by the way. So again, remember I told you in an emergency we don't think clearly? You may have been able to rattle that person's name and number off without even thinking about it, second nature. But in an emergency, you may not remember. So it's a good idea to keep a list, again, of the person that you might call, how to get in touch with them, their relationship to you. The other thing is that maybe you're going to end up in a shelter. Now, maybe you're not going to be in the shelter indefinitely. Maybe you're only going to be in the shelter for a short period until you can make arrangements for someone to come and pick you up. But a shelter worker may come over to you and say, so, Mrs. So-and-so or Mr. So-and-so, would you like us to make a call for you? And you're going to go, oh my God, I can't remember their name. Or, oh my God, I can't remember their phone number. So that's why it's a really good idea to write it down here. And there's 3 categories, and I'm going to explain why there are 3 categories. Local emergency contact might be a relative that lives in town or a neighbor out of the neighborhood. So I'll go back to the gas explosions in Lawrence, Andover, and North Andover. Whole neighborhoods were affected. So people needed to have contacts outside of their neighborhoods. And the last category is 100-mile emergency contact. Depending on the situation, now again, for those of you who may have been involved and remember the ice storm, that was a huge area that was affected. It wasn't a 100-mile radius, but it was a huge area. And depending on the situation, it could be a huge area again. So do you have a friend or a relative? Maybe 100 miles is going a bit far, but do you have a friend or a relative that's 25 miles away or 50 miles away? And if so, write this down because you might need to know who they are. The other thing I want to mention to you is in the event that you do have to leave your house and you're not going to be able to go back there for a while, and you're going to go to your cousin Angela's house and she lives 50 miles away and you haven't been to her house in a long time, after you write her name in the book, I suggest either if you are still mobile, taking a drive out to her house, or if you don't drive, maybe it's a nice day trip for her to come and get you and take you to the house, and I'm going to tell you the reason why. I have friends that live in Pennsylvania. They live about 2 hours outside of Pittsburgh. And I haven't been to see them in a while, but I used to go every 5 or 6 years. And I always seem to arrive at night. They're a good 10-hour drive from my house. So with lunch and everything else, it takes me a while to get there. And so the last time I went to see them, I arrived in the dark and I was absolutely sure I knew where their house was. And I'm looking and I'm looking, and what I remembered was that they had this big, huge wraparound porch that went along the front of the house and the side of the house. So when I got to the place I thought was their house, I'm looking for this wraparound porch. And there was no wraparound porch. And I thought, oh my God, am I lost? So I continued down the road a while. Because I'd been there several times before, I knew when I had reached my limit. I turned around and I went back. Now they knew I was coming, but they didn't have any porch lights on. I turned around, I drove back to the house that I thought was theirs, and the lights were on. Well, guess what? They forgot to tell me that they enclosed their wraparound porch and made a living room out of it. Now, that would have been helpful information for me to have before I drove out there. So at least ask your relative if they've made any changes to their house that you should know about. Other thing is, it says possible phone trees. Now, we haven't done phone trees in years and years. It used to be a really popular thing. But in an emergency, it may be the best thing to do. Maybe you've got 12 or 13 or 15 people that you want to know that you're okay. You're not in an emergency going to call 12 or 13 or 14 people yourself. But if you can set up a phone tree where maybe you call your sister and your sister calls your cousin and your cousin calls her aunt and all of that, that's a quick way to do it. And then it also says other people's plans to learn. Now, again, this is really going to depend on your personal situation. The best example that I can give is if you, let's say you live in a housing complex and you're really close to your neighbor on the right and the neighbor down the hall diagonally, and you see each other all the time and you're really good friends and you play cards together or whatever, it might be a good idea for you to understand not only where their plan is, but what's in their plan, and share your plan with them. So again, if you're in a situation, you can rely on them to help you out and vice versa. The next page is minimizing the risks of danger and how to be safe. So how many of you still own your own homes? Fair number of you. So we know that one of the biggest causes of power failures is when trees and limbs fall on power lines and fall on your houses. So take a walk around your property. See if you've got any trees that look like they're dead or dying. See what direction they're heading. I'm not going to tell you that having a tree cut down isn't expensive, because it isn't. I know that from personal experience. But it's going to end up being more expensive if the tree falls on your house and or cuts your power. And the other thing to understand is that in a power failure, the power company will repair any damage to the lines up to the point of your house. If your power lines on your house are damaged, that's your responsibility. So it's good to plan ahead and make sure that your house is not in the danger zone of a tree falling. Test your, and I know that you probably have had presentations by local fire. Make sure you test your carbon dioxide, monoxide, and smoke alarms. That old rule about, when you change the clocks, check your batteries is still a good important one. And if you don't have a carbon monoxide alarm, make sure that you get one. Fire extinguishers are really great to have in your kitchens, especially if you have gas stoves or propane stoves. They're really good to have if you have fireplaces or wood-burning stoves. So make sure that you not only have one in each place, but make sure that they work, and make sure that they are the proper fire extinguisher for the type of fire you might be putting out. Make sure that if you have chemicals, we all have chemicals in our house. All those lovely cleaning products that we usually store them underneath the sink, or we may have a pantry that we store them in, or maybe we have access to our basement and we store them down there. Just make sure that they're not stored where they might become flammable. So again, storing them in a cabinet near your gas stove in the kitchen is not a good idea. Or in your basement near your furnace is not a good idea. Make sure you stay up with things like cleaning and repairing your chimney. If you have a wood stove or a fireplace and you use it often, make sure that you have it cleaned appropriately, whatever that recommended schedule is. And that includes, I can't talk, the flue pipes, any connectors, and the vents themselves. Evacuation. Evacuation is a tough one, and I want to talk a little bit about evacuation. We all kind of see on the news, especially during hurricanes and winter storms, there's always a lot of discussion about whether or not people that live on the coast should evacuate. And, the reporters always interview that person who says, I've been here for 45 years and I've never had to leave my house. And I'm going to hunker down and I'm going to stay. Okay. How many of you remember Sandy that whipped through New York and New Jersey about 5 or 6 years ago? A lot of those people didn't believe the storm was going to be as severe as it was, and they didn't leave their houses, and they ended up having to be evacuated. And what I want to tell you about that is, first responders, those people that are going to go and save you, they can only go and save you if the conditions are safe for them to do so. So when an evacuation order is given, take it very, very seriously. Because two things. Public officials don't arrive at that decision easily. That is a very, very difficult decision to make and to tell people that you need to leave your house. So they're not going to come to that decision lightly. Secondly, if you choose not to evacuate, and then in the middle of the storm you find yourself trapped, you may not have an escape route. Because if it's not safe for you to leave, it may not be safe for first responders to come and get you. So take heed and do what's recommended. Ed?
I was in Louisiana last year for the hurricane. We spoke to many people who stayed in their home and would never do it again. That was a Category 4 storm, and there was not much left around the coast. And the people actually stayed in their houses. And most of them said after that, they would never do it again. The damage was unbelievable.
Any of you live in a mobile home? Okay, great. If you know someone that lives in a mobile home, mobile homes are not secured structures. And in high winds and rising waters, they're the first to go. So if you know someone that lives in a mobile home and is potentially in danger, please recommend that they leave before the storm hits. The other thing is, for those of you that have phones, do you have emergency alerts on your phones? Okay, listen to them. The other thing is, be aware about watches and warnings. Now this comes in with tornadoes. And I don't know how many of you remember the tornadoes that whipped through Western Mass in 2011. So a watch means that conditions are right for whatever they're talking about, particularly a tornado. A warning means that they've usually spotted a funnel cloud. So know the difference between them. I can tell you, I don't live anywhere near Western Mass, but I remember that day like it was yesterday. And I remember what the sky looked like that morning. And I'll tell you, I was afraid. It didn't, of course, end up coming anywhere near where I was, but I could tell that something was off, something was different. So be aware of your surroundings, and if you've got concerns, follow up on them. The next thing I want to talk about, we've kind of touched upon a little bit already, and that's psychological stress. So let's face it, we all have things going on in our lives that impact how we react every day. Some things are minor, some things are major. But if we're already stressed out about something, and then we're put in a situation where we encounter a disaster or an emergency, that's going to impact even further how we respond to things. Several years ago, I was in a car accident, and I was living with my sister while I was recovering, and I didn't realize, it was a severe enough accident that I still have lasting damage from it. But I thought I was coping really well. And then I began to notice that little things that normally I would just kind of gloss over would make me cry. Things silly, stupid little things, and I would break down and start crying. And that's because I didn't recognize that I was still stressed from the accident. So it can manifest itself in many ways. You may find that you're not as hungry as you used to be, so you're not eating as much. You're not sleeping well. Things will set you off so that you either cry or you pull into yourself, or maybe you start snapping at everybody for no particular reason. So just be aware of the signs. And this kind of talks about some of the things that might happen if you are going through a stressful period. I've already mentioned the crying, the sleep disruption. Maybe all of a sudden you're finding yourself getting headaches and you're not a headache person. Or you find that things that you used to be able to remember, suddenly you can't remember them. These are all potential signs of stress. And if you know that certain things trigger a stress reaction in yourself, there's a place to write it at the bottom of the page. And this could be helpful if you end up going into a shelter. If you bring this with you, you know, people can flip through and go, oh yeah, Dottie says that when she's stressed out, she starts yelling at people. And then they're gonna know, oh, okay, well, we wanna pay special attention to Dottie so she's not screaming at people. When I return home, what do I do? So check for gas smells. If you have propane or natural gas and you smell something that's not right, don't go into your house. Go to a neighbor or go to somebody else and call for assistance. Avoid contaminated waters. Now, if you're on a public water system, they're going to be monitoring the situation, and they're going to be one of those groups of people sending you out alerts. If you have power, maybe you'll hear it on the television. It's always a good idea to have a radio, especially one that runs on batteries, so that you can hear those kinds of alerts. If you have a well and the well hasn't run for several days, it's a sure bet that once the electricity comes back on, you're going to need to flush out your system. Flooding. I don't know how many of us have come upon high waters, especially in the springtime, with snow melt and the rivers and streams getting higher. And you know, we kind of look to the right and we look to the left and we go, oh, I don't think the water's too deep. I think I'm going to chance it, because if I have to go around, it's going to add 10 minutes to my drive and I'm running late. But the thing to remember is that we don't know the condition of the road under the water. And it may very well be that the water looks like it's the right level, but there's a sinkhole. And you drive through the water and you're going to end up at the bottom of that sinkhole. So please don't drive through flooded areas because you don't know. The other thing is that it could be power lines down and you don't see them and they're in the water. So don't drive through flooded areas. Talks about checking for structural, plumbing, or electrical damage around your house. Structural is pretty easy. You can usually see the outside of the house if it looks like there's damage. Turn on your water and there's nothing, there might be a problem with your plumbing. Electrical might be a little trickier. If your power has been off for an extended period, and I would say 48 hours, throw the food out, don't take a chance, because food poisoning is a real thing. And if your food in the freezer has unthawed, depending on how long it's unthawed, maybe you can cook it up. I know it's a huge loss, but it might be easier just to get rid of everything and start over again.
There's a trick with that. You take a container, you fill it with water, you freeze it, then you put food coloring in it. So when that defrosts, it mixes, and you know your food isn't any good anymore.
Interesting.
Say it again. Put water.
Freeze water,
Yep.
put food coloring.
After it's frozen.
Yep.
Yep.
That will freeze. Put it in your freezer.
Yep.
And when that mixes,
Then you know.
you know it's been off too long to keep the food.
And then you contact your insurance.
Right.
Say our insurance, yeah.
Always take photos of damage. I don't know how many of you, like me, have heard horror stories about insurance companies not wanting to pay. Before and after pictures, take pictures of everything, outside, inside, your contents, put them in a safe place like a safe deposit box. Then take pictures of the damage so that you can compare the two, so that the insurance company knows, oh, yeah, this person had a $10,000 dining room set, and now they don't, because they don't want to pay. So protect yourself. Watch for mold. Even though we don't live in a southern climate, I've noticed over the last couple of years that our humidity has been worse than normal. And so even here, it's possible that water damage can result in mold if it's not cleaned up right away. And it might not be cleaned up right away because you're not there, because you've evacuated for some reason. So be aware of mold growth. Don't ever try to rebuild something unless you've gone through the proper channels, including your local building department, and have a professional come in and do it for you. And we're back to don't hesitate to reach out to others for support. There's no reason to ever go through something all by yourself. Other people are willing and wanting to help you. The other thing is that you can ward off certain levels of stress. And just by doing things that calm you and relax you. Go for a walk, take a warm bath, treat yourself to something special, like a dish of ice cream, read a book, watch a favorite television program. Do what you know helps de-stress you. And then consider volunteering. Probably a lot of you already volunteer. How many of you volunteer with something? Quite a few of you. I know a lot of people that I've run into, they said, oh my gosh, I don't know how I ever worked, because I'm busier now than I was when I was working full-time. Because they're here, there, and everywhere, which is great, because it gives you a reason to get up in the morning. So if you're not volunteering and you've got time on your hands, think about doing it. The next page, practicing my plan. So I told you this is a fluid document. After you've written down everything in here, however long it takes you, a week, a month, whatever it's going to take you, maybe it's your summer project, make sure that you practice things like evacuating from your house, evacuating from your apartment. Make sure you know the escape routes. If you're going to be using something in an emergency that you don't normally use, practice. One thing I remember, and Ed, you can probably talk to this, I remember watching a training film having to do with animals, and they were talking about horses and evacuating horses. And they were saying that if your horse has never been in a horse carrier, they're not going to get in one when it's an emergency and you have to evacuate them. So think about that in advance. If there are things that you might need to do or need to use in an emergency, make sure they work and practice with them ahead of time. Include your personal network. If you're going to do some kind of a drill of your plan, make sure that the people that are closest to you are involved in that drill. Let's say that you have an emergency and 911 is called, and a first responder goes to your house and they ask you, what's wrong? How can I help you? How many of you have had that happen to you? Not a lot of you, a couple of you. Try to explain in the clearest but briefest way possible what your problem is. And I say that because now my mom is 90 years old, and she is one of those individuals who loves to tell the whole story. And I can just imagine calling, EMS to come to her house, and they say, well, tell us why you're here. Why were we called? What is your problem? Well, 5 years ago, I did whatever, and then it ended up in this. And it's like, you know what? You're here because she fell and she hit her head. Okay? That's why you're here. And the reason I say this, and I don't mean to be disrespectful, But EMS is usually going from one call to the next call, to the next call, to the next call. And they want to be patient with you and they want to be respectful of you, but they don't have time for your whole life story. So why don't you practice a little bit? If somebody came to your house, how would you tell them? And I have to keep remembering my mom because she still likes to go through the backstory. Make index cards. So everything is listed in here, but maybe you want to just take some of the information, put it on index cards and stick it in your purse or in your go bag. We didn't really talk about go bags, did we? A go bag basically is a duffel bag, a suitcase, a backpack, whatever you think you're going to need. And I tell people, think about if you're going away for a long weekend. What would you put in that bag to take with you that would A, make you comfortable, B, keep you healthy, and C, give you what you need to get through 3 or 4 days? That's what should go in your go bag. And there is a paper over there that kind of gives you a description. Of course, you're going to want a change of clothes, you're going to want medications, you're going to want toiletries. Maybe you have a special pillow that you like to sleep with and you can't sleep without the pillow. Again, you're going to have a go bag for your pets too. So there may be little things you want to put in your go bag, like this list of medications. Maybe you don't want to take the whole plan, but maybe you want to make some index cards that list your medical conditions, your allergies, your medications, phone numbers, immunization dates. That's a big one. Everybody now wants to know, when did you get your COVID vaccine? And when did you get your booster? So those are all things that you want to either make a copy of your card and keep it with you or write it down. I am notorious for not keeping a full tank of gas in my car. There are 2 things in this life that I really don't like. I don't like grocery shopping and I don't like stopping at the gas station. But particularly if you know a storm is coming, make it a point, make it at least 3/4 full. Because A, if there's a power failure, the pumps may not be working. B, there may be a huge line, and depending on how low your gas tank is, you're not going to make it to the pump. So try to be aware in cold weather, if you let your gas tank get too low. I don't know the mechanics of it, but if there's not enough gasoline in your car won't start because it can't get to what it needs to have. So try to be conscientious and keep enough gas in your car all the time. And anything else you can think of that might be particular to you. And then the last page, maintaining my personal preparedness plan. I'm sure Cindy could maybe set up a day where you all come in and try your plans, or maybe instead of you doing it all at once, 1 week you do a couple people's plans, and the next week you do another. The important thing is to keep up with your plan. If you change doctors, if you add a doctor, if your doctor moves, if you add a medication, if you subtract a medication. These are all fluid things. So make sure that when you have something like that happen in your life, that you update your plan. So, I've thrown a lot of information at you. Let me ask if any of you have got any questions for me. Yes, sir.
It's more of a comment with regards to if you're cold, if it's below freezing and you have to leave your house, after you shut off your water, after you shut off your electricity, and after you shut off your propane, go downstairs. Your water heater is the lowest point in the house, okay? Your electricity and propane is also. Your water heater isn't running. It has a drain on it, okay? That will drain all the water in your out of your lines, because if you shut everything off, there's still water in your lines, and especially at the junctions, will freeze and the pipes will burst. And most of your pipes are in the wall and it causes enormous problems. Okay, so if you can, go after you shut your propane, electricity, and water off, go down, lowest point of your house, and it's just like a faucet. Open it up into buckets and drain off all the water, so your lines will be empty. And the other thing is get like a cup of Prestone antifreeze and put it in your drains. Okay, because if your drains burst, there's water in your trap. And if those burst, okay, when you turn your water back on, you're gonna have water all over the place, under your sinks and the toilets and everything else. So your drains in your toilets, just take like a cup. You know, get a couple of quarts down to Walmart or something and leave it. And put about a cup in, and you're gonna have, in your J-trap, you're gonna have antifreeze. And in your toilet also, there's a J-trap in your toilet, just takes a cup. And you won't have to worry about water freezing, because if you turn your water on, okay, you're going to have problems with water penetration, you're going to have it coming out of your ceiling, you're eventually going to have mold, so it's eliminating a huge problem.
Thank you for that. Yes, ma'am.
I just have a couple of questions. Now, like he's talking about the water tank, living in the senior project,
The water heater,
the water heater.
right.
Okay, so living in the floor apartments, when you walk in the door, I have water tank in my closet for 3 other apartments other than mine.
Is that a water tank or a heater?
That's the tank.
It's a tank.
So is the heater like in the half cellar?
Yeah.
So then that's
the
up to the
water-
housing to,
The water heater, by plumbing regulations, has to be the lowest point in the house.
but the tank in the closet itself isn't something that I would.
A water heater generally wouldn't be in a closet.
Oh, yes.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, they are. They
I'm
are.
telling you, you have,
They
and
are.
that, and the other question was, we all live in the housing,
Now,
okay?
excuse me, just what, you know about this?
We all do.
Okay?
I have a water heater in my closet.
Yep, she's
all
got
live
it
in
in
housing.
her
Okay,
closet.
well, you can do the same,
They can't touch them though, I don't
Can
think.
can
They
I
live in
ask a
housing.
question before we go any further? You live in public housing,
Right,
so there are people that manage your buildings.
Yes.
In an emergency, they're the ones that are gonna know what to do,
They're
not you
okay, so
personally.
then in an emergency, if it says like eviction notice,
Evacuation.
Well,
where do
evacuation.
we evacuate to? Because
So that's something
we
you
don't
need
even
to,
have a hall over there. When it was built, they had a hall.
well, you wouldn't evacuate within the building. You'd leave the building.
Right, and
So that's something you need to think about and plan now.
exactly. Where would something like that go? Would we come here? Would we go to?
So Cindy, do you know anything about, is your senior center considered a shelter? Or is a school
At
considered a
school, the
shelter?
high school is the shelter for the town.
The high school is?
High school.
But can I just tell you one thing? A lot of towns don't want you to know where their emergency shelters are. And the reason is because depending on the emergency, that building may not be usable. So that's why you want to listen to your alerts. In Oxford, I presume you have something like Code Red or some kind of a system you sign up for. They're going to send out alerts in an emergency, and they're going to tell you where the shelter is located. Because there may be a reason. Maybe the shelter for some reason is in danger. Maybe there's not electricity at the shelter. Maybe there's a generator and the generator's not working. So make sure that if you're not signed up for your local Code Red or whatever, that you sign up now. And I say now, I don't mean like the second, but the next day or two. Because they're going to send out messages and they're going to tell you where to go.
There is a regional shelter, which is the high school top lot. I don't know how to say it.
Tantasqua in
Yeah.
Sturbridge.
Tasker and Sturbridge, yes.
That is the regional shelter.
Right. Now, a lot of people don't want to leave their community and go to a regional shelter. I'll tell you the reason that we have regional shelters.
Now that was.
Staffing. Now, staffing a shelter doesn't seem like a big deal, but I know that I've worked in an emergency shelter, and it takes a lot of people. And so, if you've got a shelter in Oxford, a shelter in Auburn, a shelter in Worcester, a shelter, it takes way more people than what you're likely going to have. And a regional shelter, that you take all those people that were going to work in 3, 4, 5, 6 towns, you bring them to the regional shelter, and now all of a sudden it's manageable. So don't poo-poo a regional shelter. It can actually work better for you than a local shelter.
The regional shelter also has an animal component to it. So you'd be in the same building as your animals would be in. And what they're gonna do is they're gonna rely on you to do your care for your animal. Walk it twice a day.
Feed it,
And
visit it. And that's great for you and your pet, because you're still gonna have a connection. Your pet's gonna be just as confused as you are, especially if, like my pets, they have the run of the house, and now all of a sudden they're gonna be in a cage. So seeing you every day, having you take them out for a walk if it's possible, if it's not inclement weather, that's gonna boost your spirits because you're gonna know your pet is safe, and it's gonna boost your pet's, because I don't know how many of you realize that pets can have nervous breakdowns too. So it's really important to make sure you take your pet, and that if at all possible, you're in a place where you can maintain a connection with your pet.
I have a question regarding the regional. So if you have a reptile, can you bring reptiles there? You can, okay.
you have snakes.
So we're all dying to know, what reptile do you
I had
have?
snakes, but I have tortoises.
Tortoises, yeah. Yeah, we mean all pets. And that means whether you've got gerbils or guinea pigs or parrots or white mice or whatever you've got, they're all pets.
As long as the bird.
The mice are not gonna be loose, they're gonna be in a cage. I'm seeing somebody going, what, mice?
Reptiles.
Yeah, the reptiles will be in a cage too.
In town here, where we no longer have a landline where we used to get our emergency call.
You can sign up for Code Red through your cell phone number. And I was gonna say that, if anybody needs assistance signing up for the Code Red, or even if you're not sure, see Cindy or myself and we can get you, we'll go on with you and get you set up for the Code Red. It's very important that you should have it, whether it be for storm-related things or shelter,
Road repairs.
road repairs. It could be snow ban, parking ban, emergencies, fire things that they send out. So it's very important that if you're not signed up, please see Cindy or I if you need assistance doing it, and we can help you get signed up.
Cindy, I came in late, so excuse me, but I lived when I lived in Wareham, we were there 2 weeks, and we were without power and electricity for 7 days because of the snowstorm, so we had to go to a shelter. We worked the shelter, and as you said, you don't have the volunteers, but the 3 things that were the most important to us was filling our tubs with water ahead of time, so that you have water, thank you, so that you have water for flushing toilets if you are on a septic system. Fill your tubs, fill gallons of milk containers ahead of time and freeze them and put them in your freezer and your refrigerator. That will give you 2 or 3 days extra for coldness. And the thing that she brought up about being prepared with pets, and that just rang a bell with me. My dogs had never been in crates before. And so being prepared and having a crate, and then just having them every so often go in and come out, and go in and come out. So if I had to evacuate them and put them in a crate, I wouldn't be spending half an hour running around the house trying to, because they would be fearful. So those are just a couple of things that we went through for 7 days without having power and electricity.
Any other questions? Well, I want to thank all of you for being such an attentive audience. I hope you found this helpful. Please head over to the table and help yourself to anything over on that left side where it says Medical Reserve Corps. And if any of you have interest in volunteering, grab that gray brochure or my business card and let me know, and I'll be happy to walk you through how to become a volunteer. Cindy, thank you so much, and Laura, thank you so much too.
Thank you, Lois.